we're going to take up a political reporters roundtable, and guess who we've got to join us?
Welcome to the roundtable with WBEZ's political expert, government and politics reporter, former Sun-Times State House reporter. Welcome to the show, Dave McKinney. Thanks for joining us. And Dave, you heard what Governor Edgar was talking about and the role of money in politics. One of the latest big money developments in the governor's race is that one of the other biggest money players in Illinois, the Uline factory, they just put in $1 million in Darren Bailey's campaign. Okay, so Bailey, who represents the Trump wing of the Illinois Republican Party, along with Congresswoman Mary Miller and her husband, State Rep Miller, now have a thing. And they have $1 million with the Ulines, who are major donors to Republican candidates and causes. What's your analysis, Dave, on what this means to the governor's race? And thanks for joining us.
Well, hey, good evening, ladies. That was a pretty invigorating conversation with the former governor and Coles County friend of mine from way back. But I guess the way I would look at it is that $1 million was an absolute lifeline for Darren Bailey. Bailey was having trouble raising money. On the flip side, Bailey has this infrastructure built up where I believe he is poised to tap into the Jeannie Ives wing of the party. And if you remember in 2018, Jeannie Ives gave Republican Governor Bruce Rauner a run for his money. I think she had something like 48% in that race. So she's, he's tapping into that wing of the party. Dan Proft, another, who is not enamored with Richard Irvin, the Aurora mayor. So I mean, Bailey is poised with this money to really be able to compete. Now, the other thing I would say about Uline is that in the Ives Rauner primary, he did put significant money into that race, but it was only $2.5 million. And you compare $2.5 million to what Ken Griffin just put into Mayor Irvin's account, $20 million. You have an idea that there's still a very drastic imbalance in how much the candidates have to play with.
Right, and actually Irvine has more than almost 2 million, I think, from other Illinois establishment Republicans. I mean, just think, Craig Duchessois put in $1 million in the last few weeks, and that hardly merited a mention because of the 20 million, but Irvin has other things. Do you have any sense that the three other candidates in the race can find their blocks, their base of voters? Because we now kind of have the establishment on one side with Mayor Irvin, and then you have the Bailey candidacy on the others?
Well, you don't have a sense that the other three who have declared, Gary Rabine, the road paving operator from the northwest suburbs, Paul Schimpf, the former state senator from downstate, and who am I forgetting?
Sullivan, Rabine.
Yes, Sullivan from around Petersburg, Illinois. I mean, you don't get a sense that those folks are gaining any real traction here. I mean, there's not a buzz really around any of them.
And I don't see a base. There's not a geographic base. There's not a political base. There's not an ethnic base. Show me the base. Yeah,
but here's where they come into play, Lynn. I mean, if they, I'm not convinced that they all make the cut. I mean, somebody might decide at the end here that, well, I don't know if I want to, my polling doesn't look good. I don't know if it's worth going into debt, all of those considerations. But if they do stay in, then it really kind of matters, because we have an election, with 5 people where it is a total crapshoot. And if each one of these kind of, lower tier candidates, if you call them that, pick off 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% of the vote, then that could become a factor in the end, because you've got a winner coming out of a primary here that may not exceed 40%.
Or if you have 5, it could be less. So you have a point. No one is going to run if it's a race to the right, which it will be. I would think Mayor Irvine still will be the least to the right, and then the others just chop up the Bailey vote, I think. What do you guys think?
Well, part of it too, I mean, the suburbs, I think Governor Edgar mentioned the suburbs are really going to be key. And I assume that Richard Irvin, that's where he's looking for his bread and butter, because first of all, because he's from the Chicago suburbs, because he's well known there, and because that's a would be considered a much more moderate part of the territory, where some of the other candidates are going to be perceived or be actually much more conservative and attracting much more conservative voters.
Right.
Dave,
And
what do you think?
yeah, Dave.
Dave?
Well, I mean, I think that, Irvin, I think he probably has an eye toward Rabine, because in a way, they're both sort of competing for that Collar County vote. They're both, that's their natural constituency there. On the flip side, Bailey and Schimpf and Sullivan all are downstaters. Now, I mean, one little data point to keep in mind from the 2018 Republican gubernatorial primary, 53% of that primary vote came from outside, Cook and the Collar counties. So that kind of demonstrates, I think, the point that Governor Edgar was making, that downstate, the power downstate has in determining, who is going to be in charge of the Republican Party now. So, if you look strictly at that, you would think that somebody with a full head of steam like Bailey could come into this with a bit of an advantage over someone else. But again, you cannot underestimate the value of having so much money as Irvin does.
Shifting gears to another race, Jesse White finally weighed in on the Democratic primary for Secretary of State, and he endorsed Ana Valencia. Right now, it's a three-way race. Alexi Giannoulias, the former state treasurer, Alderman David
Moore. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
David Moore,
Mm-hmm.
and Ana Valencia, the city clerk. What's the impact, do you guys think, of the Jesse White endorsement for Ana Valencia?
Well, Dave talked about the lifeline that Darren Bailey just got from that new money, but I would think that this is a lifeline for Ana Valencia. Alexi Giannoulias has been considered the front runner, from day one. He's been much more successful in terms of raising money and racking up high profile and high powered endorsements. And Ana Valencia has a story to tell, and she's being a woman of color, being a Latina. That could give her some advantages, particularly in the Democratic primary, but she just wasn't raising the money and she wasn't getting the traction. Well, now with someone like a Jesse White behind her, that could make all the difference in the world. I guess a lot of it, depends on what are Jesse White's coattails and how much power does he have to convince voters that they should go with a candidate simply because he's backing that candidate.
Well,
I mean, I think, I think an important thing is this really gives her instant political infrastructure. I mean, White has his own political organization, and don't forget that Senators Durbin and Duckworth are both supportive of Valencia. And so what I think, when you've got the sort of the elders of the party coalescing behind one candidate, it really kind of then opens the doors to the normal constituencies of the Democratic Party to get behind her too. You think the labor unions, the teacher unions, the Illinois AFL-CIO, and with that comes bodies on the ground knocking on doors and money. So I mean, it really could be an important thing. And I would think on the flip side with Giannoulias, he sort of had given this veneer of invincibility, because he had name recognition, he has money, but I do think that this represents a blow to him. I mean, I think he, to have the guy who holds the office now really endorsing your rival like that is a genuine blow to Giannoulias, and I don't really know quite how you counter that if you're in his campaign.
Where is there any real issue that you think can define this race? For what it's worth, I don't. And I think the unions are split. Each one has gotten their share of endorsements. I guess one thing to wait is to see if Moore stays in the race, or if he leaves and then it becomes a one-on-one. Is this a thing where Alexi Giannoulias' fundraising advantage over Ana Valencia could in the end outweigh the Durbin, Duckworth, Jesse White endorsement?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I think Dave's point about infrastructure is very important. Infrastructure is not necessarily just about money. It's about troops on the ground. It's about senior level people. I mean, the Duckworths and Durbins of the world have a lot of people in their organization, and of course Jesse White is where he is today because of the organization that he's built over many years. So I think that you can look at the money and you can look at the infrastructure, and I guess it remains to be seen which one is going to will out. But I think this will also allow her to raise more money. She's been challenged with raising money. She hasn't. I think she's raised several $100,000. She's it's not a pittance, but with this kind of weight behind her, she may be able to really up the ante on the money.
So back to the governor's race for a second. The Republican governor candidates seem, what they kind of do agree on is in attacking Pritzker as soft on crime. That certainly is a mainstay of Mayor Irvin's thing and talking about Pritzker. Dave and Laura, how far does that go in is this more of a message for the Republican base, or do you think that's a general election message that could work?
I mean, I think that that's a message that resonates, especially in suburban Chicago and certainly in city neighborhoods. I mean, you can go anywhere in the city and have, at night hear gunshots or worry about neighbors being carjacked. But I think the collar counties are where that message has potential to move voters the most. And that, in the governor's race, I mean, remember in 2018 in the general election, Pritzker pretty much ran the table in the collar counties. The only collar county he didn't win was McHenry County. And he was able to win DuPage and Kane counties, which neither one, if you go back 100 years, neither one of them had voted Democratic in a governor's race. So it was really kind of a remarkable thing. And so the Republicans, I think, are looking for messages that will work in suburbia. But again, for Irvin, the real challenge is getting out of the primary, because, if he can't get over that hurdle, it doesn't matter what message sells in the suburbs to someone like that.
Right. And, numerically, even though we think of some of the times these primaries are won downstate, there are, I think, physically just more Republicans in Chicago and the collar counties, just because that's where the population is. So do you think, I mean, how strong do you think the Trump movement and the Trump wing of the Republican Party is right now? Both of you, what do you think? Laura, Dave?
Well, I mean, I think Edgar is right about, the Republican Party in Illinois right now being pretty dysfunctional. And I'd say that. I say that as someone who believes that, our system works best when both parties are strong, because they can kind of be counters to one another. But what you see happening in Illinois is just that you've got sort of this hard right, as you say, Trump faction, you've got the more moderate wing, and they're doing battle, and it just is, again, you don't, the only thing that they kind of unify behind are this, hatred for Pritzker and masks and crime and things like that. And I just think that the real risk for the GOP coming out of a divisive primary, like I think we are headed into, is, will the losing side, will they be motivated to vote for whoever the winner is? Will, if Darren Bailey is a loser, will his people come out in force for Irvin, and vice versa? That's the risk you run here. There's not, the days of, the DuPage County Republicans kind of being in lockstep and kind of running things across Illinois. It's over with, and so you have these factions fighting, and it's a destructive force in a way for the party.
Well, in our analysis, I'll weigh in last. What is the biggest political liability or political problem Governor Pritzker has going into this election? He doesn't have a primary. I need to think about that myself a second. So, Laura, could you go first? What is it?
Well, I think it's certainly not a crime. I understand why Irvin and others are using that issue, but I don't think that the idea that the governor is responsible for carjackings and murders and shootings in Chicago, I just don't think that concept or that idea is really going to stick. I think, bread and butter issues like the economy, the same kinds of issues that the national Republicans are hitting Joe Biden on, that, we've got inflation that's out of control, that there's still too many people out of work, that, the pandemic is really depressed the economy. And those are the kind of issues that you usually see Republicans run on. So there's been so much focus on the pandemic and sort of the health and welfare side of the pandemic, but you would think that the Republicans would want to start talking about what the kind of impact this had on the Illinois economy, and blame Pritzker for not ensuring that there's a stronger economy.
Dave?
Well, I mean, I think I agree with everything that Laura said. I mean, but I think that it's a factor if you have the leader of your party and Joe Biden, who is 20 points underwater or 15 points or whatever it is, that is a drag wherever you are, even in deep blue states like Illinois and California and New York. And that could be particularly harmful for people up and down the ballot. These lower tier races that we don't know much about, that's where it really could come into play. I do think that, assuming the pandemic doesn't go away, I think the pandemic could be a liability for Pritzker in a way, just because people are so freaking sick and tired of having to live their lives in the way that they are, because we just haven't been able to get it under control. And it's got really nothing to do with whether he's following the advice of the medical professionals, which he is, and which is the smart way to go. It's the fact that people are just tired. And I think that that, along with the economy, are the biggest problems. Now, one little data point that I stumbled across the other day that is interesting, and we'll see if it's just isolated or if it's something that continues. There's a consortium of universities that has, they've been polling on the approval ratings of governors across the country and their handling of the pandemic. It's made up of Northwestern, Northeastern out in Boston, Harvard, and Rutgers. And they posted data in January about Pritzker's standing regarding his handling of the pandemic. And he dipped below 40%, which is the lowest of any point in the pandemic for him. And that could be a concerning sign for Pritzker, I think, because if you see people, people are talking about masks in the schools, and and the Republicans are really seizing on this issue. It could be a canary in a coal mine kind of thing for him that he really needs to be mindful of. And you might see policy coming out of the governor's office that reflects some of that, where he gets behind more of the loosening of the restrictions and more forcefully behind that, and getting life back to normal. Because I think if he can pivot out of this pandemic and get this sort of life back to normal message, both with the economy and with the pandemic, that is the winning message for a Democrat in Illinois in the fall.
I agree with you. And in short, as we wrap up, I think the issue for him is if the anti-maskers, the anti-vaxxers, the people who now are this, there are movements against local school boards and library boards. If that gets into a life of its own, that seemingly is independent of the Trump movement, then that is an issue to watch if it crosses over into somehow swing voter politics. But other than that, I agree with everything everybody else said. We're at the end of our show now. Dave McKinney, thank you so much for joining us. Governor Edgar, thank you for joining us. Laura Coates, thank you for joining us.